Hi, everybody. I am Blake Cabot. I am the owner of Career Learning. And today we've got Jami Yazdani, who has done a lot of project management, worked in the education space, et cetera. And we're going to be talking about master project success. Now, a couple things. We've got some resources for you. We're about to start a poll to kind of figure out your challenges. So please answer that. And and we will get this started. So thank you very much for coming. And Jami, take it away.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited to be here to talk with you about 5 mistakes that I see with my clients and have made myself, particularly earlier in my project career. So welcome. And so yeah, there's a poll right now. We've got 2 questions here. The first, what do you find most challenging about managing projects?
Okay.
Is it creating realistic plans, managing
It seems to
project
be
teams?
realistic plans and early in planning.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So, all right. All right. Okay. So great. Thank you for that. So let's talk about 5 common project mistakes. And so what are the mistakes that we see people make most, and mistakes that, particularly as a project manager, you have some control over and can do something about? And so the first mistake that I tend to see is that you lack a simple scope statement. And so you may have a detailed scope that you've written to get funding for the project, but you lack something clear and simple that is going to help you get and sustain engagement. Another mistake is that your stakeholder roles are not clear. And so you put together a team of folks, but their role just isn't clear enough to create expectations for them about what they're going to be doing, but also really to create that accountability to get things done. The next mistake that I see is that you have not planned for project communication. And so, how are you going to communicate with your stakeholders and teams about a project? And it's more than just saying we're going to use a project management tool or we'll have some meetings. We really want to plan intentionally for how we're going to communicate about the project throughout the project. The next mistake that I see is that our tasks are not tied to deliverables. And so maybe you have a long list of tasks that folks are going to be working on throughout a project, but that connection to what you're actually going to be delivering in the project and the outcomes that you're going to create really isn't clear. And the final mistake that I see folks make is that you're reacting to delays instead of planning for how you might mitigate them. So we're going to talk through each of these 5 mistakes over the next 30 minutes or so. Feel free to ask questions, put those in the Q&A, or put
Or
thoughts
chat.
that you have in the chat. Okay. Yes, feel free to put things in the chat. All right, so let's dive into our first mistake. And so it's lacking a simple scope statement. And so I often find that with projects, project scope is overlooked, or we tend to assume that folks, particularly our project team and key stakeholders, understand the purpose behind a project. But a clear scope is really, really critical to creating and maintaining buy-in throughout a project. And so let's talk a little bit about what I mean when I say scope. And so project scope really helps us determine what the purpose of the project is. And so we may have scope statements that are going to say what is relevant to the project and what is not relevant to the project, which of course can help us avoid scope creep. But it really, for our stakeholders and particularly our project teams, can tell us where we are going to be focusing our energy and attention. And at a certain level, it also says to people, why are we working together? Why am I asking you to come to this meeting to add extra tasks and responsibilities to your already full plate? And so scope really is about purpose. And when we're talking about scope, we often write scope statements. Now, in many cases, you may have scope documents, often to get approval or funding for your project. And that will include a lot of information, right? And so there may be a justification for the project. You may have defined very clearly what's in and out of scope. You may have said these are the deliverables or outcomes and milestones, depending on what it is that you're creating. There may even have been acceptance criteria that you've determined, quality measures ahead of time. You may have written about your constraints and assumptions. And so in some cases, you have a project scope that is pretty lengthy. It was part of a business case, part of an approval process, part of a grant application or a funding application. It was part of whatever you did, or maybe someone else in your organization did to get this project approved. And so often we have these lengthy scopes, but sometimes we just have a good idea. And so sometimes our projects start with a conversation in a staff meeting or in a break room or a conversation you've had with yourself about what needs to happen, what needs to move forward. In both cases, whether you've had to write kind of a lengthy justification for your project, or it was just a good idea that was discussed either with staff or among your leadership, many of your stakeholders, including your project team, were not involved at this stage, right? So maybe they weren't in that conversation where you had the good idea. Maybe they were not part of putting this justification together. And so obviously you can share information with them, but what I find really useful is to create a simple scope statement, a one-sentence scope statement. And this scope statement really can help you create and maintain buy-in. And so while, of course, if you have a lengthy approval document, you can discuss that with your team, I find that having this simple scope really can create that buy-in. And so we can discuss it, confirm understanding early in the project to make sure people are on the same page, to avoid scope creep. Throughout the project, we can add it to the top of meeting agendas to remind people why we're here, to remind people what we're doing. And of course, it's something that can be easily added to reports and other documents. And so we all understand the purpose of this project. And so writing a simple scope statement is pretty easy. And so the approach that I like to use is here. I do like to tie scope to some broader goal or mission that can really help with buy-in. And so I typically say, in support of some broader goal or mission, this project will take some type of action. Are we building something, creating something, researching something to get to some type of outcome by a certain deadline? And so I've got an example here. Let's say we have a strategic goal to improve retention. We might have a project where we're developing a new employee onboarding system, and we're going to do it by June 30th. And so this one sentence statement is really simple. It can keep us on track. It can remind people why we're doing this, what we're trying to do, what our purpose is, and it really does help set expectations. And so writing a simple one-sentence scope statement is something that I absolutely recommend to maintain engagement throughout a project and also to get people bought in early in the project. So the next mistake that I see folks make, I see this a lot, is that the stakeholder roles are not clear. And clear roles really create clear expectations for your stakeholders and teams and how they are going to engage with the project throughout the project. What I see a lot of folks do is kind of confuse the role that someone has in your organization with the role that they have on your project. And so I'm often working with project managers, training project managers, and I'll ask them to identify their project stakeholders. So those who are impacted by the project work or the project outcomes. And what I often get is a list of organizational roles. Oh, this person's a program manager. This person, is the finance person. This person is an employee. They're a user of our services or programs. But what their project role is may be very different. And even if you are, a finance person who's going to be managing the project budget, you still want that role to be very, very clear. And so project roles really do clarify for individual stakeholders or groups of stakeholders how they should contribute to a project. And so we really do want to think about stakeholder engagement. And so when we think about how we want people to engage in a project, maybe they need to make decisions, maybe they need to receive, periodic updates, maybe they really need to be monitoring progress. As the project manager, that's something that's part of your role as well. Maybe they have tasks to complete, they're going to provide us with information or feedback. Maybe they're going to be the folks who are going to be using whatever it is that we're creating. And so when we're thinking about project roles, we really want to think about engagement. And so there's lots of different roles that stakeholders can play in a project. I've listed a couple of here that might be useful. And so sometimes we have a project sponsor or initiator. Often this is a member of leadership who is saying, this is where we want to spend our time. You may have a separate project funder, someone who's funding the project or providing resources. There's you as the project manager. You may have an advisory committee. And so this could be a group of folks who are going to either advise you as the project manager and how to move the project forward, or who are going to really be advising on whatever the deliverables are that you're creating. We typically have some project team members. These are those core folks who are going to be doing a lot of the work of the project, but you also may have project contributors. And so this might be somebody who only has one or two tasks throughout the project. They don't need the same level of engagement as a team member, but they're still supporting the project. You may have subject matter experts, users or clients, whatever they're called within your organization. And sometimes too, we can have informed stakeholders, and this may be colleagues, partners, other folks who need to know that the project is happening, but don't need the same level of engagement. And so instead of just throwing everybody on a project team and inviting them to meetings and hoping that they understand what's expected of them, when we use project roles, we're really clarifying what that expectation is for engagement. And it really can help you manage your stakeholders better and also allow people to understand how they're expected to contribute. So the next mistake that I see, and I see this all the time, is that folks have not planned for project communication. And so a lot of times when we're planning projects, we have planned for many, many things. We've planned budget, we've planned schedule, we've planned tasks, we've written a detailed scope. We've planned how we're going to work with our team. Hopefully we've planned what roles people are going to play. But we have not planned for project communication. And so we really want our approach to communicating about our project with our stakeholders to be very, very intentional. And to be intentional, we need to plan for it. And so in the poll, I believe most folks said that they had planned relatively early in planning, plan for communication relatively early. And this is absolutely what we want to do. I often see approaches to project management where communication planning is one of the last things that they ask you to think about, if they ask you to think about it at all. And I think that's a mistake, particularly in environments like education, like nonprofits, like HR, where our projects are impacting lots of different stakeholders and where we need a lot of stakeholder engagement. And so we want to plan as early as possible. And so an approach to communication planning is to really answer this question. So who needs to know what about our project and when and how will they know it? Simple question to say, sometimes harder to answer. But really, what we want to think about, and a very simple approach to communication planning, is to think about the who, the what, the when, and the how. A lot of folks using project management tools, the project management tool folks will say that they are the answer to your communication problem, that you only need to use Asana or Monday or whatever your tool of choice is. And I love those tools. They're great, but I find that that is not the only way that I need to be communicating, because often we have stakeholders either outside of our organization or who it doesn't make sense to give access to that type of tool. And so we do really want to think about the who, what, when, and how. And so the who should be easy if you've done some stakeholder planning. And so if we've thought about our stakeholders and who they are and identified them, we've got our who. And then the what really should come from the role. And this is another reason why assigning roles can be very, very helpful, because it will help you think about the type of information that folks need to either give to the project or you need to give to them about the project. So the who and the what are really tied to our stakeholders and the roles that they're going to play. And then we can really think about the type of information folks need. Some people just need kind of periodic updates. This could be leadership. This could be other folks in your organization who just kind of need to know the project's happening and sort of what the status is. There are people who really need to track progress. This could be operational folks. This is you as a project manager. This could be members of your project team. Often we need to get feedback from people to do the project well. And so what type of information do they need for us to get that feedback from them? There are typically people like our project team members and maybe project contributors that have to complete tasks. There are people who have to make decisions. There may be folks who need to review what your project plans are. And there are folks who will need to implement whatever it is that we're creating. If we look at this what here, one of the things hopefully you'll notice is that a lot of this some of this information that we're going to be sharing with folks starts when the project starts. So if we need our leadership to review plans, if we're going to be sharing some information or getting early feedback from stakeholders, this isn't just something happening later in the project, at the end of the project. We should be communicating throughout the project. So that's our who and our what. And then our how could be many, many things. I've listed some common ones that people use in projects here. Often we are sending emails depending on our project. We may be putting information on our website or social media. If we're getting feedback from folks, we may be sending out surveys, having forums or focus groups or interviews. We are likely having meetings, even if it's just with our project team. We're often creating documents or dashboards, other information that we are sharing with stakeholders or across the organization. And we may be using some type of project management or task management tool. And so then we can think about the when. So how often are we going to be sending updates to a project sponsor or funder? How often are we going to have meetings with our project team? How long are people going to need to access this information? And so if we've created documents, how long do they need access to those? And how are they going to be able to access them? And so what we can do here by mapping out the who, what, how, and when is you really can get to an actionable plan for how to communicate. I do have a spreadsheet, pretty simple spreadsheet that is listed in the resources, a communication planning worksheet that can really help you with this, that allows you to think about the stakeholders and their roles, the information that they're going to receive. And once you start mapping this out, sometimes we can see where there are ways that we can be more efficient in how we are communicating.
And that
Oh,
resource is on the resources tab. If you guys click on it, it'll take you a link to the website and Jamie's website, and you can download the worksheet.
Yes. Yes. Thanks, Blake. So, all right. So that's communication. So let's talk about the fourth challenge that I see. And it's that our tasks aren't tied to deliverables. And so what I often see when folks start project planning is that they start to create this long list of tasks, right? They're like, well, what are we going to do first? What are we going to do second? What are we going to do third? And so they start creating this long, long list. And that gets very complicated very quickly. Often our tasks can overlap. So we could be working on this while we're working on that. Some tasks are really big, right? And could take a very long time. And some tasks are very small. And so what we want to do to determine tasks is to not start to make this complicated list. We really want to think about project deliverables. And so our deliverables are whatever we are creating, building, designing, producing, accomplishing, or planning to deliver either during or at the end of the project. And so these really should be concrete in some way, or tangible. So what are we creating during this project that we are delivering to our stakeholders? Those are what deliverables are. And so that's really where we want to start. And so when we're thinking about deliverable and task planning, first we want to define what our deliverables are, right? So what is it that we are creating? Are we building something? Is it a report? Are we creating a system? Are we creating training? So we want to think about defining our deliverables very, very clearly. And then best practice is to break each deliverable down into smaller and smaller elements until we get to the level that we can assign to someone or the level where we can track progress. And so working backwards from deliverables to get to tasks really is project management best practice. And I think you'll find that this is something that is going to be very helpful to you and save you a lot of time as a project manager. And so with our sample scope, we're building a new employee onboarding experience. You might say, well, that experience is our only deliverable, but typically there are more things that we are creating during a project. And so if we really think about it, in this project, we may deliver 4 different deliverables. We've got a needs assessment. We've documented this new program. We're creating the content and materials, and we're also doing an implementation plan. Obviously, 10 different organizations with the same scope might list 10 different deliverables here, but this is a good example. And so then to get to tasks, we would take each deliverable and start breaking it down. And so the needs assessment, maybe we gather some existing data. We're going to conduct interviews. We're going to analyze the needs that we see from the interviews, and we're going to create a report. You could break this down into sub-tasks, but it really is best practice to start with deliverables. And it's not only best practice to go from scope to deliverables to tasks, it also is very, very useful. And so it can create purpose clarity. And so if we just have this long list of tasks of varying sizes, it can be hard for your project team members to really connect clearly that task to that larger purpose. So why am I, updating this report? What is this for? And so that can really support buy-in and accountability if people understand how their tasks connect to the outcomes of the project. It also makes it easier for you to develop your schedule because you're not just working with a long list of tasks. You can think by deliverable, by kind of task group. And it also makes it easier to track progress because you can very easily determine which tasks are connected to which deliverables. All right, and our final mistake is waiting for delays to happen and just reacting to them instead of planning for ways to avoid delays before they happen. And so what I see is that folks start putting a schedule together, they assign due dates to tasks, and that's their schedule. They may have a conversation with folks about it just to make sure it seems okay. but that is the only thing they're doing when it comes to schedule. And so we really want to be thinking about how we can mitigate delays. And so you can start with a schedule where you've added those due dates to tasks, but we really then want to look at it and say, is this realistic? Most things take longer than we think they're going to, particularly if the folks on your team have lots of other responsibilities. So we want to get input on our schedule, share that draft schedule with your team. They're in a better position often to know how long tasks are going to take, but also whether they're available. Maybe their department, has some big activity that they do every August and they're not going to be able to give you as much time during that month. You wouldn't be expected to know that. The other thing that we can do is build buffers around key or inflexible dates. So if there's dates that cannot be moved in a project, you don't have any wiggle room, build as much time around those as you can. But one of the things that we can do is use progress check-ins. And so progress check-ins are times to check in with your team members ahead of a key due date. And so progress check-ins are one of the things as a project manager that you can kind of add to your own to-do list, make part of your project schedule. It is better to know before something is late that it's not going to happen on time than it is after the due date has passed. And so what we do is find times to check in with a team member, maybe a week before a deadline, maybe 2 weeks before a deadline, just to see how things are going. This really allows us to get a status update. And if there are challenges, if they're not going to be able to make that key due date, then we can start to try to help them. Do they need more resources? Is there somebody who can jump in and support them? Are there other things that we can start moving around if they're not going to meet this due date so that the entire project is not delayed? And so essentially here, we're learning about a possible delay before it happens, so that we can try to mitigate it rather than waiting until the due date has passed and you've had to reach out and say, well, where is this task? Where is this deliverable? And then you're often in a bad spot. So that was a really quick introduction to 5 common project mistakes that I see folks make in a lot of different industries across a lot of different projects. And so writing a 1-sentence scope statement that you can share broadly throughout a project can really help with buy-in. Making sure your stakeholder roles are very clear, not just the role they play in the organization, but the role they're going to play on this project. Planning for project communication is really important, being intentional about it and doing it early. Tying your tasks to deliverables can help also support that buy-in and engagement and accountability. And then making sure that we're trying to mitigate delays ahead of time. Project check-ins are a great way to do that. If there's a strategy that you see here that we've talked about that you think you can implement right away in a project, I'd love to hear about it in the chat. So if you want to dive deeper into some of these topics and project management in general, I do have some sessions coming up over the next month or two. So for any HR folks on the call, we do a 4-part HR project manager certification that's running the week of April 14th. We have a project management for nonprofits certification that's running the week of April 22nd. If you are in the higher education space, we have a kind of short, quick essentials training on May 8th. And we also have a larger project management certification for higher ed folks that's running the week of May 27th. And so I see that there's a discount code in the chat that can be used for that. And so if you have any questions, we only have a minute or so left, but I'm also happy to connect outside of
I've
the
got one.
session. Yeah.
So how do you use AI on this? ChatGPT, Claude, whichever one you want. How do you effectively use AI in this project management process that you were outlining?
Yeah, so one of the easiest things that you can put into AI is if you have 3 or 4 deliverables, ask it to break it into tasks for you.
Right.
It's pretty good at that. I find that it is overly ambitious on schedules, so I don't find it that useful for schedules. It thinks everybody can do stuff in a day. It can also help with communication planning. You know, you could list some stakeholders and roles and the type of project and ask it to help you come up with a communication plan. It's also great at meeting agendas, helping you craft a nice email if a task is overdue, coming up with reports. So there's lots of ways that you can use it to get a good first draft.
And would you use that first sentence that you talked about at the beginning as a prompt to create a document?
Yes, absolutely. That scope statement would be a great input for letting it know what the project is about.
Okay. Well, great.
Great.
Well, thank you very much, Jamie.
Yeah.
This has been fantastic, and I appreciate it you doing this. And I hope you guys enjoyed it and learned something. And we'll be having more of these over a period of time. And please come to Jamie's classes. She's great. You're going to enjoy her. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Bye bye.
Thanks.